Well, here we are in the first section of the last chapter. Let me repeat that, the last chapter of our new material, which is very exciting. Last time looking at this guy. Nonetheless, we have a three-section chapter. Our focus today is just on learning more about just what partnerships are. I know you've read about them, you've done the questions from yesterday, but now let's talk about like just adding on to your lecture notes and a supplemental handout that the sub will give you. We're going to look at the characteristics, how they're organized, advantages and disadvantages, and then what typically goes into a partner or partnership agreement. First of all, what's a partnership? As we've talked about in the previous days, a partnership is an association of two or more. I think the word partnership makes you think two people, but it's two or more who carry on as co-owners of a business intended of generating profit. Typical partnerships, you see small retail stores be partnerships, small service businesses, or even manufacturing companies. But I think the ones that kind of get forgotten are law firms or accountants can have partnerships, lawyers, and then of course even like the medical field or doctors can own a partnership. Some characteristics of partnerships. What are they? What aren't they? It's considered an association of individuals. The entity itself takes on its own legal and accounting format. The entity is not taxed. Rather, any of, each of the partners' share of the net income personally is what's taxed. So it's like they get, it's like they're getting a paycheck and then that piece is taxed, whereas the net income for the whole partnership is not taxed. There's also a section of the chapter talking about the characteristic of the mutual agency piece. And as its definition describes, it's an act of any partner that's binding on all the other partners. So as long as the act is appropriate for the partnership, it's cool. The book gives an example of a good one and a not so good one. For example, if two people owned a grocery store, one of the partners could go out and buy a delivery truck. Not necessarily doing it with the other partner knowing. They'd probably have the kind of talk, but that is appropriate for a grocery store to go buy a delivery truck. Now, if the same grocery store owner runs out and buys a new snowmobile, that's not necessarily appropriate for the grocery store and wouldn't be in accordance with the mutual agency piece of a partnership and couldn't go use funds to do that. A few more characteristics of a partnership. It's considered to have a limited life. You're introduced to a new term that we talked about yesterday during our Q&A piece, but a dissolution, whenever a dissolution occurs, it doesn't necessarily mean the business ends. It could, but basically when a partner leaves or a new one comes, it's considered the partnership dissolution, and they have to just relook at all of the contractual parts of the partnership. So just know that a dissolution is when the business is probably still going. It's just that there's new players. Either one leaves or one shows up. Now, as you learned yesterday in the Q&A, when there's a liquidation, my apologies there about the spelling error. When there's a liquidation, they convert all of their stuff into cash and walk away. Business ends. I think the vocabulary of unlimited liability versus the limited liability is really confusing. Okay? The definition listed here is for unlimited liability. Each partner is personally and individually liable for all of the debt, the partnership debt. When it is set up as an unlimited liability, they, meaning all the creditors, can first attack the business debt or the business assets and then they can go after the personal assets. So I want to read to you exactly how the book describes that. I'm on page 568 in the unlimited liability section, and it says, each partner is personally and individually liable for all partnership liabilities. Creditors' claims are going to first attack the assets of the partnership. If these are insufficient, so there's not enough cash around or they can't get some assets turned into cash, then they're going to attach to the personal resources. So their own checking accounts, their own supply of cash in their personal use. So unlimited liability is a little dicey because you as a person and you as the business could be attacked, so to speak, financially. Whereas a limited liability, they, meaning the creditors, are limited in what they can take. They can't maybe take personal stuff. So just know that unlimited, it's fair game. We can come after you and get what we need, versus limited, you're a little bit more protected. A limited liability, think of the partner in a bubble. There's only so many things they can get at. A few more characteristics. The list is long. What's considered co-ownership of property. So we're talking the business is owned, and then what property is attached to the business. Each partner has a claim on the total assets, you know, the cash, the supplies, the equipment, the inventory, all of that, the owner has some skin in the game. This claim does not attach to specific assets, and all net income, or loss of course, is shared equally by the partners unless they set something else up. We talked about you know, the different ratio splits, which we're going to get into later in the chapter. So don't feel like, oh, I don't understand them, because I know that was a little fuzzy yesterday when I talked through the questions. We will cover those in depth in the coming week. But basically the stuff that goes with the business, the partners have a stake in. We're going to learn next that there are partnership characteristics and forms that go with. Special forms of business organizations are often used to provide protection from that free game. Unlimited liability. Sorry, anyone can come take personally or professionally. They come in the form of limited partnerships, LLPs, and LLCs, which now you are going to get a handout from the sub. Thank you, Ms. Hennen, outlining this. There's a beautiful chart on page 570 that I've replicated for you to take notes on. Kudos to you if you've already taken notes on this, but this is just a supplemental resource that can help. So these are special ways to protect from that unlimited liability that can pounce anytime. Let's take a look at the different ways a partnership can be organized. Regular partnership. Two general partners, they walk in, they want to form a business. Some advantages, it's really pretty easy to do and really inexpensive to create. It can be a simple handshake, but it's advised that there is more of a formal agreement, written agreement even, in forming this. The disadvantage though, the owners or partners are personally liable for all debts, and it's seen as the unlimited liability approach. The creditors are going to attack the business first and then come after you personally if you can't pay your bills. There is not an AKA. I know I put that section on the handout. It's just a general partnership of two or more people. Getting into some of the more protected types of partnerships, an LTD or LP is known as a limited partnership. It's like the bubble. Some advantages: limited partners, or the partners who are in the bubble with a protectant. Think of them walking around with bubble wrap around them, have limited personal liability for business debts as long as they don't participate as a top dog. So if they're, think of them sort of like a silent partner, if you will. They have some skin in the game, but they're really protected, especially if they're not acting like the boss. General partners can raise cash without involving outside investors in the management of the business. So again, it's that inside kind of silent partner. The AKA, you see it as LTD or LP. So standing for limited or limited partner. Now there are some disadvantages. General partners are personally liable for the debts. Now notice that's the general. That's not the person in the bubble. So there's still someone who has a lot of skin in the game that is going to take a hit personally if debts can't be paid. It's certainly, a little bit more expensive to create this kind of partnership because there's so much more legalities and paperwork involved. But it's really suitable for companies that invest in real estate because there's that line of protection, that limited side of things that not anyone can swoop in and grab. Then we get into the LLP, or the limited liability partnership. You hear of a lot of LLPs. You'll see the doctor example there. Some advantages here of an LLP or a limited liability partnership. Most of the interest to partners in old line professions such as law, medicine, or accounting. The example here are a bunch of doctors that form a partnership. Most often they will be an LLP or a limited liability partnership. And then the other advantage is that the partners are not personally liable for the malpractice of others. So if you have one doctor off doing illegal things, personally or professionally, the other partners aren't going to lose out. So if you have a bad egg, the other ones aren't personally liable. Some advantages: partners can remain personally liable for many types of obligations. So there is still that piece that, gosh, you could be personally liable. This is also usually very expensive. I'm surprised that's not there, and often limited to a short list of professions. They're not just going to go let any business be an LLP or a limited liability partnership. They're going to want someone to take the heat if things aren't going well. And finally then, an LLC or a limited liability company. How does this differ? Owners have limited personal liability for the business debts even if they participate in management. So the difference here is if from the LP, I'm sorry, that was really flashing all over. An LP, they cannot be part of management. So if they're that partner in a bubble, they cannot participate in management, versus an LLC, they can. Owners have limited personal liability, so they're not going to attack your personal checkbook, but they can be in management. The biggest disadvantage: very expensive to set this up. So basically, this is allowing a creditor to not attack your personal checkbook, but you can be a manager or call them the shots. And it's very costly to set this up. When two people want to come together and say, we want to start a business, it can be the handshake. But it's really important to specify as many details as they can, preferably in writing, this list. You should list their formal names and their capital contributions. What are they bringing to the play date, so to speak? Are they going to produce some land or a building or equipment? And if they bring that to the table when they shake hands on it and start the working professional relationship, those capital contributions are big players. Who's going to do what? What are the duties of each of the partners? And oftentimes one person's strength is the other person's weakness and vice versa. Number 3, how are they going to share net income? Or how are they going to account for net loss? Several times you see a 50-50 split. We're going to get into the other types of ratios here in the coming sections. I don't want you to worry about that now. What about if they're going to withdraw assets, so cash or equipment or supplies or inventory? If I'm selling lawnmowers and I want one for myself, how does that look? How does that work out? Procedures for disputes. So what happens when there's problems? What happens when we can't get along? What happens when we don't get along, and what's going to be the protocol there? What happens when someone wants out or someone wants in? What if Joe wants to leave, or what if we want to add Sally? How is that going to work? Would we go through a dissolution process and remap everything? And certainly number 7, what happens in the unfortunate event if a partner dies? It's important to know a plan and even to have that in writing. And so you can see that there's much more to this than a handshake. Lucky for you, there is not a brief exercise that goes with this section. It gets into section 2 instead. And that's actually where this concludes. I cannot stress enough that handout. Also available on page 570. Really take a look at the different types. Remember, we've got a regular partnership. We have an LP, or a limited partnership. We have an LLP and an LLC. Understanding the differences. I mean, we really could make some Venn diagrams here on these, what's similar and then what's in their own camps. Perhaps you could test your skills at that. But knowing these types of partnerships and the little quirks that go with them is really what you need to know from this first section of the chapter. Now, as we get into the second and third portions of the chapter, that will be next week. I know we've got conflicts on Monday, and then there's no school next Friday, but we'll work through the rest of the book that's very heavily problem-based, and then get ready for a test then 2 weeks from today. So with that, have a good weekend.